All right, so this is review number 12, our last review to finish up content area 4. Content area 5, Indigenous Americas. Please look over in your notes, and then some of it is on the YouTube channel as well. And then content area 6 is on the YouTube channel. But I would really focus most of your attention on content area 4. Hopefully you can watch all of them, but if not, content area 4, 3, 2. All right, so this is, we're gonna start off with Surrealism. This work is called Object, which is, well, the artist, Murray Oppenheim, wanted to call it Object, but the person who was hosting the show, the founder of Surrealism, Andre Breton, who founded the movement in 1924, wanted it called Le Déjeuner en Fur, which means luncheon in fur. This is a teacup, a mass commercial produced teacup covered in Chinese gazelle fur. It also has a saucer and a spoon. This is Surrealism. Surrealism is super realism. It is dreamlike images, things that are the imagined, objects with symbolic function, right? So this stems from that idea of, what if you want to keep your tea warm? Well, how's an animal stay warm? Fur. What if your tea stays warm, but with fur, right? Doesn't make sense, but when you juxtapose those things together, like a dream where crazy things make sense, then you end up with surrealism, okay? Think about Surrealism as being a time period where artists and poets and writers are trying to deal with this idea of a physical manifestation or a written manifestation of an internal thought process, a way that our external and internal realities can combine. Some people definitely take this in a very tactile way, right? And thinking about, okay, raising this up to your mouth and putting your lip on it and what that would feel like. It definitely has some sexual connotations as a fetish object. Some phallic interpretations, obviously there. And so again, it's less about exactly what she meant by it, and it's more up to the audience and how they're going to interpret this object. Please think about texture, think about surface. She says her work is not a drawing, a painting, an illustration of an idea. She's actually created the thing itself. So rather than draw a painting or paint a fur-covered teacup, she's given you a fur-covered teacup. And so it becomes a manifestation of her inner thoughts. Stresses the physicality of the objects. There were some issues with presentation. We talked about that. It was not received super well. We also looked at Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo is an artist who was very influenced by Andre Breton and the Surrealists in Europe, but at the same time stuck very true to her regional Mexican aesthetic. Two Fridas is about her identities as the child of a German immigrant and an indigenous Mexican woman, and how she's kind of dealing with that duality of her identity, of who she is. The symbolism of the heart here, and how the heart can be viewed as a Catholic. Here on this German immigrant side, the heart can be viewed as a Catholic Sacred Heart symbol, but over here on her Mexican heritage side, it's viewed as a sacrifice, a human sacrifice in the Aztec world. She talks about the life-giving blood and how it kind of circles around. We see it and connects the two. She's often exploring ideas of what it means to be a woman, what society says a woman should be versus the individual nature of female expression. She's holding a picture of her on again, off again husband, Diego Rivera, in her hand, and then it has this kind of tumultuous cloudy sky behind her. Double self-portrait, dealing with a lot of pain. This is somebody who had a lot of physical and emotional pain in her life, and she deals with that through her painting. That'd be a great piece if they gave you this. So good. All right, jumping out of surrealism for just a minute and looking at some organic architecture. This is Frank Lloyd Wright. Again, he is a student and a mentee of Louis Sullivan, who did the Carson Perry Scott and Company building. And Frank Lloyd Wright is creating a piece here that is made to enhance and improve the natural landscape. So organic art that is definitely influenced by the international style, but much more regional, much more using local materials, blending in a little bit more with nature than Le Corbusier did with Ville Savoye. One of the unusual parts about Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water House is that it is set up over the creek, so you can actually see the waterfall from inside the home. You can hear it. You can get down into the water, but you can't see it until you walk away from it, and that's to keep that viewpoint fresh. One of the big innovations with this site is the ferro concrete, which is steel reinforced concrete, and the cantilever. So the ferro concrete, the steel reinforced concrete, is what runs through these areas that jut out without supports below them. That's called a cantilever. Okay, right? It shoots out like that. Genius Loki, right? He was able to kind of sense the spirit of the place and build something that enhanced the space. Organic architecture, we talked about all that. And the fact that it was reinforced, talked about that. Oops. Migration of the Negro, this is by Jacob Lawrence. Since this was in the sample question they gave us, I really doubt it'll be on the AP exam, but this is a work that is about the harsh conditions and reality of people of color found when they left the Deep South and they moved to the North, looking for fairer housing, better job opportunities, more equality. In reality, when they got there, they realized there was still segregation. And that's what this piece is about. Lawrence created this series of, I think, 60, I don't know how many. It's been a long day. But this is number 49 in the series. The series begins and ends in train stations. They're simple hand-painted frames, really inexpensive, case and tempera on just a particle board. All right, The Jungle by Rafito Lamb. This is our Cuban surrealist piece. This is a gouache painting on paper, and it is providing a new narrative to the cha-cha-cha of the travel posters of Cuba. So this work is about the past of Cuba for sure, and slavery and the establishment of sugarcane as a cash crop, but it's also about the fact that Cuba is viewed in a certain artificial way at this point in time in the 1940s to vacationers coming from the United States. This is kind of a jungle of figures with sugarcane. You can see different bodies here, emphasis on the vertical on this almost square work. So thinking about the socioeconomic disparity in Cuba at this point, he was very influenced by Surrealism, actually worked in Europe for a while, and then his acknowledgement of the Afro-Caribbean culture and the ideas of transformation within that culture. Right. Again, I don't think this work is going to be on the test because it was on the sample question, but this is Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in the Alameda. This is by the husband of Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera. We'll call him Mr. Frida Kahlo. No. Okay. He is a Mexican surrealist artist. He made this giant fresco for a hotel, the Hotel del Prado in Mexico City, and it was eventually moved and put in a little small freestanding museum in Alameda Park. So this is an imagined scene of hundreds of years of Mexican history depicted as if it happened all at one time. So again, we really connect this work to Raphael's School of Athens at the Stanza della Signatura, High Renaissance fresco. And so he's using a mezzo fresco, a medium fresco technique here. He's depicting this long horizontal scene. It's kind of jumbled a little bit. So this is antiquity on the furthest left, the revolution on the furthest right, and then kind of his contemporary highlights in the middle. He briefly worked with Picasso in Cubism. He was inspired traveling through Italy, looking at the frescoes there, very, very into radical politics with his wife, Frida. A lot of symbolism there from the Aztec past. All right. We're going to move forward there with Mr. Rivera. All right. I guess I just needed a break there, just like a little mental to prepare you guys for Dada. All right, so this is the Fountain, second version, or because the first version was accidentally thrown away. This is by Marcel Duchamp, 1950. The original is from 1917. This is a ready-made. So important that you guys understand a ready-made. What if they gave you this and they ask you to contrast it with a classical sculpture, Doryphorus, right? And you'd be like, oh no, what am I going to talk about? We're going to talk about the fact that rather than making this by hand, the art is in the concept. The art is in the fact that he chose it to be art. Therefore, it is art. It is a ready-made. He took a urinal from a store called Mott's Plumbing. He laid it on its side and he signed it, thus giving it a new purpose as a work of art. He didn't pretend to make this, right? He chose it. Dada is an anti-rational, anti-art cultural movement that involved poetry and kind of nonsense songs, nights of kind of free form, free stream of consciousness things. Remember that this work is asking us to consider art as an intellectual interpretation, not a physical craft. He had this as part of the Society of Independent Artists show, and they said it would not make it into the show, and then he actually stepped down from the board because of that. So much going on. All right, so abstract expressionism, we have two forms in our canon. There's two types. There's gestural and there's color field. This is gestural. So gestural, we're seeing mark, we're seeing movement of the arm. This is Woman One by Willem de Kooning. It's part of a series. Aggressive brushwork, gestural mark making. You see the action of the hand of the artist in this work. Man, if we compared this to, oh gosh, I don't know. If we tried to compare this to like Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun's portrait of her painting Marie de Medici, oh my goodness, what a change. So remember that modern art is truth, right? It's saying this is a canvas, this is a flat surface. These colors can be as arbitrary as the artist desires. We're seeing here a canvas that is gone through a lot of process. Remember, he would paint layer, scrape, layer, scrape. He sometimes incorporated collage into his paintings. It has this ambivalence of a reverence for women, but then also a little bit of a fear or intimidation of women. It is definitely a response to the pinup girls of the World War locker pinup images where men would have these early pornographic depictions. And so reimagining maybe a woman could be an interpretation of this work. My favorite corporate building, because everyone should have a favorite corporate building. This is the Seagram Building, New York City. This is on Fifth Avenue in New York. It is a international style in America. Remember, in America, the international style is more typical for corporate structures, not for homes. Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson are our architects. Mies says less is more. Okay, that's his quote, less is more. And you guys just wrote about this piece, so hopefully you remember it. Steel frame, glass curtain wall, and then the bronze I-beams that run up the exterior. This structure was built as a symbol of modernism. It was the most expensive building in all of Manhattan at that time. It was built to hold the Seagram Beverage Company Corporation in America, Canadian company in America. It's set back. It has those mathematic classical proportions. Y'all know I love this building. All right, pop art. We're going through things really quick, but remember, these art movements are all happening around the same time and mixing up. So pop art is stands for popular art. It's an art of the commercial, an art of the quick, of the transient, of the sexy, of the fad, of the plastic, of the temporary. It's art of the moment. You can't recreate it. It's already done. It's already happened. This is the Maryland diptych, which is an homage to Marilyn Monroe. You have a diptych, which is a religious image. What if they gave you this and they asked you to compare it to like the Annunciation triptych? You could talk about icon, like a modern icon versus a religious icon. You could talk about the multiple panels in the Merode altarpiece. Annunciation triptych were for veneration and worship, and this is for commemoration, or maybe considering her as something other than just a sex symbol. She died in 1962, and quickly after her death, he started making work to commemorate her. Her ubiquitous presence. This is made in silkscreen, definitely an homage to the icons of the medieval. Pop art is a reaction against abstract expressionism. All over composition, repetition. He's appropriating that image from a headshot. Flat printmaking. Yayoi, love her. So this is a Narcissus Garden. This is an installation of how do you fit Yayoi in a box or a category? So this is an anti-art or anti-art establishment movement. She's really exploring this idea of, can she create work that exists outside of a specific time and place? Yes, she can. So the original installation and performance was at the 1966 Venice Biennale. And remember, she was invited to be in the show. Our work by Helen Frankenthaler, The Bay, was. And so she just shows up in Venice with all of these silver balls, where she sells them as without a middleman, without a gallery. And she talks about the fact that you can reflect in this ball, and you see not only infinity reflected, you see this changing of time as people walk by, as water moves, as birds go by, you see this change of time. You also see yourself, right? Narcissus, based on the classic myth of Narcissus. Narcissus Garden can take on the reflections of whatever environment it's put on. Her work has to deal with cosmic infinity, obsessive excess. She uses art as a way to process and deal with her own mental illness. Here's a work from the original installation. Now, these balls can exist in perpetuity because they can be recreated whenever she wants to recreate them, right? In limited editions, 1,500 balls to be displayed in different places. She also does the infinity rooms. that I love, love, love. All right, so here's the bay. This is the second type of abstract expressionism. I said we had two types. This is the second type, color field painting. In color field painting, instead of using a brush, or instead of relying just on a brush, you also rely on the forces of chance by pouring, by holding up the canvas or the paper and letting the paint or the water drip in certain directions. Instead of gestural mark, you have flat pools of color. So Helen Frankenthaler created this work, and this is what got into that 1966 Venice Biennale. It's acrylic on canvas. What is it? It's a color form she created by using the soak stain method. That blurring tells us that she's working wet on wet. Abstract expressionism, please just realize it's about the physical qualities of the paint. This is not Mondrian trying to create a universal visual language. This is about paint on a canvas, right? And what happens with the paint. Very direct. How can you forget this pop artwork, Lipstick Ascending on Caterpillar Tracks by Klaus Oldenburg? This is responding to several things. One, the fact that this is at Yale, and this was 1969 was the year that women were first allowed to attend Yale University. This has to do with a protest against the Vietnam War, and this has to do with ideals of gender equality, ideals of students' rights and speaking out. Remember, he intentionally had this displayed as, well, it was supposed to be temporary, but it was in front of the memorial to students lost in world wars. So he put it there, and it became this rallying point for all different types of protests, social, civil, different workers' rights, all protesting here as a base. And then he remade it in steel. So here's the original. He went to Yale, and so he did this specifically at his alma mater. It's both masculine and feminine. I'm sure you remember that. The spiral jetty. This is our earthwork, land work. 1970, he's taking a very primordial, basic symbol or shape, right? This is the way that crystals grow. This is the way that many plants unfurl, from the spiral to very simple form, and he's creating it large, and he's creating it out of natural materials from this area: rock, salt water, dirt. He's using remember, he walked and kind of marked it out, and then he had dump trucks bring in the material to create the ground. He built this knowing that eventually it would disappear. He's thinking really about presentation here. How do you show this work? How do you present this work? That's museum, and you have to have photography, video. Back up here. So site versus non-site, how to display this work. Entropy, this concept that eventually systems break down. And so he's also considering that as he's making this. He's thinking about the fact it's already partially broken down because of the rock, the nature of the material. All right, I had to go get my computer cord. Talked about entropy. Talked about the site versus non-site. How do you show something that exists somewhere else as a work of art? This is the last work in content area 4. What a way to go out. I for those of you guys who are really interested in this class and really wanted to do contemporary, I will be recording the contemporary lessons this summer, and we'll put them out on YouTube for all my fans. No, but I'll let y'all know for those of y'all that are interested. All right, so house in Newcastle County. Wow, what if this is on the AP exam? That will be special. All right, so this is postmodernism. Again, post is going to mean it happens after, oftentimes in reaction to what's happened before. Y'all know I love modern art, and I love modern art, love modern architecture. I like some postmodern art. Postmodern architecture and I, not friends, but maybe you love it, and I know some of you do. So the house at Newcastle was designed, mostly the head architect was Robert Venturi, and the second command was Denise Scott Brown. This is all started with this sketch of the back of the home. Again, it has some things that are influenced by the classical, right? Columns, pediment, barrel arch. But then you go, that looks different, and it's not symmetrical. And the columns are flat, and the pediment is chopped off. And so it has these unexpected things, we shall call them. Postmodern is going to oftentimes contradict modernism. He was influenced by Mannerism and Baroque, which makes sense because he's glorifying the complexities, glorifying contradiction and juxtaposition. He said that modern architecture had run its course. It was time for something different. He thought that international style was too austere. That's what I liked about it. And his version of something that is an ideal for him is messy vitality over obvious unity. And he said the Hagia Sophia was an example of that. It does have an Americana feel with the clapboard siding, the wooden shutters or wooden shingles. But then it has things like this blind out front that don't quite mesh with, you know, a typical traditional home in America. It's the back side. The interior, playful, whimsical, a bit influenced by the Gothic, but not. And so less is more versus less is a bore. So as we move forward, we've gone far, right? We start with prehistory, and then for this test, really, I want you guys thinking about the ancient Near East all the way through House at Newcastle, right? For the main idea of what really stays chronological, and then you need to know Indigenous Americas and Africa. But remember, those we go back in time for and then move forward. So if it kind of makes sense to you, content areas 2 through 4 are chronological in order, but then 5 and 6 are chronological only within their content area. Right, so just keep that in mind as you're kind of reviewing and as you have that list with you for the 2020 exam. But we're just thinking big picture, right? We've been through antiquity, we've looked at the classical, we've looked at the Enlightenment, we looked at early modernism. Now we've moved into postmodernism. So think about these big picture things, how views and interpretations change over time. All right, so that's it for your reviews.